The notification on the marble countertop didn't sound like a bomb. It was just a soft, polite vibration that lit up the dark kitchen. My wife, Elena, had been working late for 3 weeks straight, but the message on the screen read, "Just grabbing coffee with a friend." I looked at the cold dinner I'd prepared, then at the phone, and finally typed the words that would burn our 10-year marriage to the ground. If you've ever suspected that the silence in your home was hiding a noise you couldn't quite hear, stay with me because we are about to turn the volume up. The silence in the apartment was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, like the air in a room just before a window blows out. Mark stood by the kitchen island, his hand resting on the neck of a bottle of Cabernet that had been breathing for an hour. The label was French. The vintage was significant, their anniversary year, but the glasses remained overturned on the linen napkin. Outside, the Chicago skyline was a blurred smear of amber and steel through the sleet that lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was 7:30 on a Tuesday. His phone sat on the marble countertop, face up. Mark watched it with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a volatile chemical reaction. He knew the pattern by now. The schedule had shifted 3 months ago. Tuesday nights were no longer for late meetings or gym sessions. They were for networking or catching up with old friends. The vagueness was the first tell. The second was the way Elena would come home. Flushed, eyes bright with a manic energy, smelling of cold air and expensive hotel soap. The screen lit up. A single vibration hummed against the stone. Elena. Running a bit late. Just grabbing coffee with a friend. Don't wait up for dinner. Mark stared at the message. The innocuousness of it was almost insulting. Coffee. At 7:30 at night, in a city where the wind chill was currently 5 degrees below zero. He didn't feel the surge of adrenaline he had felt the first time, months ago, when a stray notification on her iPad had revealed a dinner reservation for 2 at a place he hated. That adrenaline had long since calcified into a cold, hard resolve. He felt tired. He felt the weight of the 10 years they had built, the furniture they had chosen, the silence they were currently sharing even while apart. He picked up the phone. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. He could just type, "Okay." He could type, "See you soon." He could play the game for another week, gathering more financial documents, securing more leverage. That had been the plan. But then he looked at the wine bottle. He looked at the reflection of his own face in the dark window, tired lines around the eyes, a posture of waiting. He was done waiting. He thought of Sarah. He thought of the conversation they'd had yesterday, the way her voice shook when she confirmed the timeline, the way she had apologized to him for her husband's sins. Mark typed. Mark. Just coffee? The 3 dots of her typing bubble appeared instantly, then vanished. She was hesitating. She was crafting the lie. Elena. Yes. Just quick catch up with an old uni friend. Why? Mark took a breath. He didn't drink the wine. He poured it into the sink, the dark red liquid swirling down the drain, looking too much like something vital draining away. He set the glass down and picked up the phone again. Mark. Ask him if his wife enjoyed yesterday. He hit send. He watched the status change to delivered, then read. The 3 dots did not appear again. Mark placed the phone back on the counter, face down this time. The apartment was still silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer waiting. It was the silence of a structure that had already collapsed, even if the dust hadn't settled yet. He walked over to the thermostat and turned the heat down. It was going to be a cold night. The 20 minutes that followed were a study in acoustics. Mark sat in the Eames chair facing the hallway, listening to the building breathe. He heard the wind rattling the double-paned glass, the hum of the refrigerator, and eventually, the distant rising whine of the private elevator. He checked his watch. She had made good time. Julian's apartment in the Gold Coast was usually a 15-minute cab ride, but panic had likely cleared the traffic for her. The elevator chimed, a cheerful, polite sound that felt grotesque in the quiet apartment. The heavy steel doors slid open. Elena stepped out. She was still wearing her coat, a camel cashmere trench that he had bought her for her birthday 2 years ago. Her cheeks were flushed, not from the cold, but from the kind of heat that rises when the heart is hammering against the ribs. She looked winded, as if she had run up the 30 floors instead of riding. She didn't take off her shoes. That was the first break in routine. Usually the shoes were off before she hit the runner rug. Today, she walked straight onto the hardwood, her heels clicking a sharp, staccato rhythm that stopped abruptly when she saw him sitting there. "Mark," she said. Her voice was thin, brittle. She cleared her throat and tried again, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You scared me. What was that text? I tried calling you back, but..." Mark didn't move. He didn't blink. He just watched her. He observed the way her hand clutched her phone so tight her knuckles were white. He noticed the slight smudge of lipstick at the corner of her mouth, hastily reapplied in the back of a taxi, perhaps, or wiped off in an elevator mirror. "I was just with Clara," she said, the lie tumbling out faster now, desperate to fill the silence he was creating. "We were at that new place on State Street. I don't know why you would bring up him or his wife." Mark finally moved. He uncrossed his legs and stood up. The motion was slow, deliberate. Elena flinched, taking a half step back. That small, instinctive retreat hurt more than the infidelity itself. It told him that she saw him not as her husband, but as a threat. "Clara posted a story on Instagram 10 minutes ago," Mark said, his voice even, devoid of the rage she was expecting. "She's in flight to London. I liked the photo." Elena's mouth opened, then closed. The air seemed to leave the room. The Clara defense evaporated, leaving her standing exposed in the foyer. She looked down at her phone, then back at him, her eyes searching his face for a lifeline, for the usual softness that she had exploited for months. It wasn't there. "Mark, please," she whispered. The energy drained out of her. She slumped, the confident gallery director vanishing, replaced by a woman caught in the glare of a headlight. Can we sit down?" "You can sit," Mark said. "I'm going to the guest room." "No," she said, reaching out a hand, but stopping short of touching his arm. "Don't do that. You can't just send a text like that and then walk away." "What did you mean? You said..." "You mentioned his wife." "Sarah," Mark corrected her. "Her name is Sarah. You've met her twice, once at the Christmas party, once at the fundraising gala. You told me she seemed dull." Elena went pale. "I had coffee with Sarah yesterday," Mark continued, watching the realization dawn on her face. "She's not dull. She's actually very observant. She recognized your number on Julian's bill. She recognized the dates." "Mark," "She wanted to know if I knew," Mark said, cutting through her name. "I told her I didn't. I lied to protect you. Yesterday, I lied for you." He looked at her, his eyes traveling over the expensive coat, the disheveled hair, the trembling hands. But tonight, when you texted me that you were just grabbing coffee, I realized I was the only one in this marriage who was still trying. He walked past her. He smelled the cold air clinging to her coat, mixed with a scent that wasn't hers, a heavy, musky cologne that he now identified as Julian's. It made his stomach turn, a physical wave of nausea that he swallowed down. "Mark, wait," she pleaded, turning to follow him, tears finally spilling over. "It's not what you think. It's complicated. Please, just listen to me." Mark stopped at the doorway to the hall. He didn't turn around. "It's not complicated, Elena," he said quietly. "It's actually very simple. You just haven't realized that I'm not playing the game anymore." He walked down the hall and closed the guest room door. He didn't lock it. He knew he didn't have to. She wouldn't dare open it. The guest room bed was too soft. It was a mattress they had bought for Elena's mother, who preferred a cloud-like sleep, a stark contrast to the firm support Mark required for his back. He lay in the dark, staring at the unfamiliar shadows cast by the streetlights on the ceiling, his body rigid, his mind cycling backward. The text message tonight hadn't been a guess. It was the final stone in a wall he had been building for 90 days. It started with the architecture of her schedule. Mark was a man of blueprints and topography. He noticed when lines didn't meet. 3 months ago, Elena began obsessing over her phone's privacy settings. It was a small shift, turning the screen face down on the table, the sudden appearance of a privacy screen protector that turned the display black from an angle. But the first real crack was the scent. He remembered a Tuesday in November. Elena had come home from late inventory. As she leaned in to kiss his cheek, avoiding his lips, he smelled it. Not the gallery's distinct aroma of espresso and floor polish, and not the crisp winter air. It was sandalwood and expensive tobacco. It was a heavy, masculine scent that clung to the fibers of her scarf. Mark knew that scent. He had smelled it in boardrooms. He had smelled it when he shook hands with Julian Thorne after finalizing the landscape design for Julian's lake house. Mark closed his eyes in the dark guest room, the memory vivid. He hadn't said anything then. He had just gone to the bathroom and washed his face with cold water, telling himself he was paranoid. Then came the receipts. Elena was usually careful, but carelessness is a side effect of arrogance. He found a parking receipt crumpled in the pocket of her blazer when he took it to the dry cleaners. The timestamp was 2:00 p.m. on a Thursday. The location was a garage in the Gold Coast, 2 blocks from Julian's penthouse. Her calendar, shared with him on the cloud, said she was at a client meeting in Evanston, 15 miles north. He didn't confront her. He didn't scream. He simply took a photo of the receipt and put it back in her pocket. The final piece, the one that made the picture impossible to ignore, was Sarah. It happened 2 weeks ago at the Symphony. Mark and Elena were in the mezzanine. Julian and Sarah were in a box seat to the left. During the intermission, Mark had gone to the bar to get Elena a sparkling water. He saw Sarah standing near a pillar, alone, watching the crowd. She wasn't looking at the stage. She was looking up at the mezzanine, her eyes fixed on where Elena was sitting. The expression on Sarah's face wasn't jealousy. It was a profound, exhausted grief. It was the look of a woman who was watching a car crash in slow motion. When Sarah's eyes shifted and locked with Mark's across the crowded lobby, she didn't look away. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, an eternity in social time. There was no smile, no polite nod. just a terrifying, silent acknowledgement. She knows, Mark had realized, the glass of water sweating in his hand. She knows, and she knows that I don't. That look had haunted him. It was the catalyst. It was what led him to reach out to Sarah yesterday, under the guise of discussing a charity auction, only to find himself sitting in a coffee shop, listening to her confirm that her husband had been buying jewelry that she never received. In the guest room, Mark rolled over, the soft mattress sinking under his weight. The anger he felt now wasn't hot. It was cold and heavy, like wet concrete. He had the evidence. He had the timeline. He had the confession from the other victim. He heard footsteps in the hallway outside. They paused at the door. He could hear Elena's breathing, uneven and shallow, on the other side of the wood. She was waiting for him to open it. She was waiting for him to come out and demand an explanation so she could spin a new web. Mark lay perfectly still, making no sound, denying her the audience she desperately needed. The sound of the zipper sliding up the back of the silk dress was loud in the dressing room, a sharp, metallic hiss that signaled the beginning of the performance. Mark stood behind Elena, his hands lingering for a fraction of a second too long on her shoulders, not in affection, but in a way that suggested possession. He saw her flinch in the reflection of the vanity mirror. She looked stunning, of course. She was wearing emerald green, a color that brought out the flecks of gold in her eyes, the same eyes that had been swollen from crying just hours before. "We are going to be late," Mark said, his voice flat. He adjusted his cufflinks, turning away from her. "Mark," Elena started, her voice barely a whisper. She turned around, clutching her clutch bag like a shield. "Do we have to do this? I can tell them I'm sick. I can say I have a migraine. And leave me to explain why the co-host of the Botanical Preservation Gala is absent?" Mark checked his watch. "No. You are the face of the art committee. I am the landscape architect. We are the power couple. That is the contract, Elena. Read the fine print." The car ride to the venue, a repurposed industrial warehouse in the West Loop, draped in vertical gardens and ambient lighting, was silent. They sat on opposite sides of the back seat, the space between them filled with the ghost of the conversation they still hadn't finished. Since the night of the text, they had spoken only in logistics. "Pass the salt. The dog needs walking. Put on your dress." When the car pulled up to the valet, the transformation was instantaneous. It was terrifying to watch. As the door opened and the flash of a society photographer's camera went off, Elena's posture straightened. Her chin lifted. The dazzling, warm smile that had charmed donors for a decade snapped into place. She took Mark's arm, her grip firm. "Smile," she murmured, the first command she had given him in days. Inside, the room was a sea of black ties and designer gowns, smelling of champagne and expensive flowers. Mark navigated the room with mechanical precision. He shook hands. He laughed at jokes he didn't hear. He accepted compliments on the vertical garden design, feeling the hand of his wife burning through the fabric of his tuxedo. Then he saw him. Julian was standing near the bar, holding a tumbler of scotch. He looked impeccable in a midnight blue tuxedo, laughing with a group of real estate developers. He looked like a man without a care in the world. Mark felt a surge of bile rise in his throat, but he didn't look away. He steered Elena directly toward the bar. He felt her hesitate, her steps faltering slightly as she realized where they were going. "Don't stop," Mark whispered, his voice cruel in her ear. "It would look suspicious." Julian saw them coming, His smile didn't drop, but it froze. His eyes darted to Elena, then to Mark, searching for a sign of the fallout. Elena must have warned him. She must have texted him in the bathroom, telling him that Mark knew about coffee, about Sarah, about everything. "Mark! Elena!" Julian's voice was too loud, too jovial. He extended a hand. "Stunning evening. The arrangements are incredible." Mark looked at the extended hand. It was manicured. It was the hand that had touched his wife. The social contract demanded he take it. The room was watching. Potential clients were watching. Mark smiled. It was a sharp, wolfish thing. He reached out and gripped Julian's hand. He didn't shake it. He squeezed it. He applied just enough pressure to grind the bones slightly, enough to make Julian's smile falter, his eyes widen in sudden pain. "Julian," Mark said, holding the grip for 2 seconds longer than was polite. "I was just telling Elena how good it is to see friends. I heard Sarah couldn't make it tonight. A shame. We have so much to discuss." Julian pulled his hand back as soon as Mark let go, rubbing his knuckles discreetly against his side. He looked at Elena, but she was staring at the floor, her face pale beneath the makeup. "Yes, well," Julian stammered, his confidence cracking. "She's under the weather." "Be sure to send her my love," Mark said, picking up 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter and handing one to Elena. "Tell her I'll be calling her soon." He raised his glass to Julian, a mock toast. "Enjoy the party, Julian. It's going to be a long night." The coffee shop in Lincoln Park was chosen for its obscurity. It was tucked away on a side street lined with brownstones, far enough from the Loop to avoid colleagues, and far enough from the Gold Coast to avoid Julian's social circle. The interior smelled of roasted beans and damp wool coats. Mark arrived 10 minutes early. He always did. He sat at a small table near the back window, watching the pedestrians struggle against the biting wind. He felt a strange kinship with the gray, brutal weather outside. It felt honest. When Sarah walked in, she didn't scan the room frantically like Elena would have. She moved with a quiet, resigned grace. She wore a simple wool coat and no makeup, her face pale and drawn, revealing the sleepless nights she had been enduring. She spotted Mark instantly, her eyes locking onto his with a familiarity that shouldn't have existed between 2 people who were barely acquaintances a month ago. She sat down, opposite him. She didn't take off her coat. "You look tired, Mark," she said. Her voice was soft, lacking the sharp, performative edge of the women in Elena's circle. "I could say the same to you," Mark replied, signaling the barista that they didn't need menus. He ordered 2 black coffees. They sat in silence until the mugs arrived. The steam rose between them, a thin veil that did little to hide the wreckage they were both navigating. "Julian came home early from the gala last night," Sarah said, wrapping her hands around the hot mug as if she were freezing. "He was shaking. He told me he had a stomach bug, but I knew. He smelled like fear." Mark looked down at the dark liquid in his cup. "I didn't mean to make a scene, but I needed him to know that the game had changed." "You used my name," Sarah said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "When you sent that text to Elena, ask him if his wife enjoyed yesterday. You turned me into a weapon, Mark." Mark felt a flicker of shame, sharp and hot. He had been so focused on shattering Elena's composure that he hadn't fully calculated the impact on Sarah's living room. "I'm sorry. I was angry. I didn't think about—" "Don't apologize," she interrupted, looking up. Her eyes were dry, clear, and surprisingly hard. It was the first time in 2 years that Julian looked at me with anything other than indifference. He was terrified. He asked me what I knew. He asked me who I had been talking to. What did you tell him? Nothing, Sarah said. She took a sip of coffee. I let him panic. I let him pace the floor until 3 in the morning. It felt powerful. Mark studied her. He had underestimated Sarah. He had seen her as the dull wife, the victim, the collateral damage. But sitting here now, he saw a woman who had been sharpening her steel in the dark, just like him. They were the disregarded ones, the reliable husband, the quiet wife, the foundation stones that everyone assumed would never move. But when the foundation moves, the house falls. So, what happens now? Mark asked. Elena is going to lawyer up. She'll try to spin this. She'll say I was emotionally distant, that I drove her to it. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. She slid it across the table. Julian is careless with his cloud storage, she said. He syncs everything to the family iPad. Photos, messages, hotel bookings. I've been archiving it for 6 months. I didn't know what to do with it before. I didn't want to believe it. She paused, her voice trembling slightly before steadying. But if Elena tries to paint you as the villain, you might need this. Mark placed his hand on the envelope. It was thick. It contained the autopsy of 2 marriages. Why give this to me? Mark asked. You could use this for your own settlement. I have copies, Sarah said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. I'm not giving this to you for the settlement, Mark. I'm giving it to you because they think we are stupid. They think we are weak. She stood up, buttoning her coat. I want them to know exactly how wrong they were. Mark watched her leave, a solitary figure disappearing into the gray Chicago winter. He looked at the envelope on the table. He hadn't just found an ally. He had found an accomplice. When Mark returned to the apartment that evening, the air had changed. The suffocating heaviness of the previous days had evaporated, replaced by a sharp, electric tension, the static charge before a lightning strike. Elena was not in the bedroom crying. She was in the living room, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the dark expanse of Lake Michigan. She held a glass of white wine, her knuckles pale against the stem. On the coffee table, a stack of papers sat conspicuously. Bank statements, investment portfolio summaries, and a printout of an email from their joint accountant. She turned as he keyed in the door code. Her eyes were dry, alert, and dangerous. The victim act was over. The misunderstood wife narrative had been discarded. Now, she was the gallery director who closed million-dollar deals. You froze the secondary checking account, she said. It wasn't a question. Mark placed his keys in the bowl. The envelope Sarah had given him was safely locked in his office safe downtown. He didn't need it here. He just needed his composure. I secured my assets, Mark replied calmly, walking toward the kitchen to pour himself water. There is a difference. Our assets, Elena corrected him, her voice rising. She took a step toward him, the heels of her boots digging into the rug. You don't get to unilaterally decide what happens to our money, Mark. We are still married. Or did you forget that while you were playing detective? Mark drank his water, watching her over the rim of the glass. He realized, with a sudden, jarring clarity, that he didn't know this woman. Or perhaps he had simply refused to see this side of her, the side that emerged when she was cornered. This was the Elena who fired assistants without blinking, who navigated the cutthroat Chicago art world with a smile that was more armor than warmth. "I didn't forget," Mark said. "But considering you've been spending our money on dinners at Le Colonial with Julian, I thought it prudent to restrict access." Elena flushed, but she didn't flinch. "Stop acting like a saint. You're enjoying this. You're enjoying holding this over me. You think because I made a mistake, you get to burn everything down?" "A mistake is leaving the lights on," Mark said, setting the glass down. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. Sleeping with my client for 6 months is a campaign, Elena. It's a series of decisions." "It was a moment of weakness," she snapped, slamming her wine glass down on the coaster. Wine sloshed over the rim, staining the white marble. "And now you're trying to destroy my reputation? I heard you at the gala. I saw how, you looked at Julian. If you drag this into the open, Mark, you won't just hurt me. You'll hurt the firm. You think your conservative clients want to hire a man whose personal life is a tabloid scandal?" There it was. The threat. She was no longer trying to save the marriage. She was trying to salvage her lifestyle. She was leveraging his career against his dignity. Mark felt a strange sense of relief. The guilt he had been harboring, the tiny voice asking if he had been too cold, too distant, finally died. "You are worried about scandal," Mark said softly, stepping into her personal space. She held her ground, chin raised, defiant. "You should be, but not because of me." He looked at the papers on the table. "I'm not going to drag this out, Elena, but I'm not going to pay for your exit strategy either. You want to talk about reputation? Let's talk about the fact that Julian's wife has access to his cloud storage." Elena's face went slack. The defiance drained out of her posture, leaving her looking smaller, older. "She has the texts," Mark lied, or rather, predicted. "She has the photos. If this goes to court, it won't be my reputation that suffers. I'm the landscaping architect who got cheated on. You're the gallery director who seduced a top donor." He leaned in closer. "I suggest you stop worrying about the checking account and start worrying about where you're going to live next month. Because it won't be here." He turned and walked toward the bedroom to pack a bag. He wasn't sleeping in the guest room tonight. He was done sleeping in the same zip code as a stranger. "Mark!" she called after him, her voice cracking, the fear returning. "Mark, you can't just leave." "Watch me," he said, and closed the bedroom door. The theme of the exhibition was transparency in modern form, a title so ironically fitting that Mark almost laughed when he read the invitation. The gallery in River North was a pristine box of white light and polished concrete, filled with people who spoke in hushed tones about negative space while ignoring the void in their own lives. Mark arrived late. He hadn't planned on coming, but the legal counsel had advised maintenance of status quo until the filing date. So he wore the tuxedo. He combed his hair. He walked into the lion's den not as a victim, but as a spectator. Elena was holding court near a massive sculpture made of jagged glass. She looked radiant, brittle, and terrified. When her eyes landed on Mark across the room, her smile didn't waver, but her hand tightened around her champagne flute until the knuckles turned white. She gave a microscopic shake of her head, a silent plea. "Don't do it here." Mark didn't approach her. He took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and stood near a pillar, watching the performance. It was Julian who broke the line. Mark saw him before he heard him. Julian was weaving through the crowd, looking less like a wealthy investor and more like a man whose lifeline had been cut. His tie was slightly askew, his face flushed with the distinct ruddy hue of scotch, consumed too quickly on an empty stomach. He wasn't looking at the art. He was hunting. He cornered Mark near the emergency exit, away from the main cluster of donors. "She changed the locks," Julian hissed, dispensing with pleasantries. He smelled of aged liquor and panic. "Sarah. She changed the locks to the lake house. She won't answer my calls. What did you tell her, Mark?" Mark took a sip of water, his pulse remaining steadily slow. "I didn't tell her anything she didn't already know, Julian. I just confirmed that she wasn't crazy." "You're trying to ruin me." Julian's voice rose, cracking the ambient hum of the gallery. A few heads turned. "You think you can just blow up my life because you can't satisfy your wife?" It was a clumsy, desperate low blow, the kind thrown by a man who knows he has already lost. Elena appeared instantly, materializing between them like a frantic referee. "Julian, stop!" she whispered, her voice a sharp hiss. She grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. "People are staring. Pull yourself together." "He's poisoning Sarah against me," Julian snapped, shaking her off. The bubble of silence around them expanded. The gallery patrons, sensing the frequency of disaster, had stopped their conversations. The quiet was absolute. This was the nightmare Elena had spent years avoiding, the messy reality of her life spilling onto the pristine white floor of her career. Mark looked at them. He looked at Julian, sweating and belligerent. He looked at Elena, eyes wide with the fear of social execution. For months, Mark had imagined this moment. He had imagined screaming at them, throwing a drink, flipping a table. But now that he was here, looking at the two architects of his pain, he felt nothing. No rage, no heat, just a profound, exhausting boredom. "You give yourselves too much credit," Mark said. His voice was not loud, but in the acoustically perfect room, it carried. Elena froze. "Mark, please. You think this is a tragedy," Mark continued, looking from Julian to Elena. "You think you're characters in some grand, passionate drama. But you're not. You're just clichés." He set his water glass down on a pedestal, next to a piece of art worth more than his car. The late-night texts, the coffee excuses, the sneaking around like teenagers. It's not romantic, Elena. It's tacky. Mark adjusted his cuffs, his expression mild. "I'm not trying to ruin you, Julian. You're doing a fine job of that yourself. I'm just opting out of the audience." He turned to his wife. "The lawyer will send the papers on Monday. Try not to check your phone during the exhibit. It's rude." Mark turned and walked away. He walked through the crowd that parted for him like the Red Sea. He didn't look back to see Julian stumbling, or Elena standing alone amidst the glass shards of her perfect evening. He walked out the glass doors, into the biting Chicago wind, and for the first time in years, he took a breath that felt entirely his own. The sound of the packing tape gun was the loudest thing in the apartment. Rip, snap, smooth. Mark ran his hand over the cardboard box, pressing the tape down firmly. It was the last one. It contained the heavy coffee table books on landscape architecture, the ones that had sat on the shelves for years, more for display than for reading. Now, stripped of the books, the shelves looked skeletal, white ribs against the gray winter light. The apartment was echoing. Without the rugs, the furniture, and the carefully curated clutter of a marriage, the space felt vast and cold. It was no longer a home. It was just a unit of real estate in a high-rise, a glass box suspended in the sky. Mark stood up and dusted off his hands. He checked the time. The movers had already taken the furniture he was keeping. The Eames chair, the drafting table, the bed from the guest room. Elena was staying. She had fought for the apartment, leveraging her equity in the gallery to buy him out. He hadn't fought her on it. He didn't want the view anymore. He walked to the kitchen island. The marble was cool under his fingertips. He remembered standing in this exact spot weeks ago, staring at a phone screen that lit up with a lie about coffee. It felt like a lifetime ago. The man who had stood there, anxious, suspicious, waiting, was gone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his set of keys. There was a heavy brass fob attached to them, a gift from Elena on their 5th anniversary. He unhooked it. He slid the bare silver key across the marble. It made a sharp, metallic sound before coming to rest exactly where her phone had sat that night. The elevator chimed. Mark didn't expect Elena to be here, but the doors slid open and she stepped out. She looked tired. The gallery scandal had been contained, but the whispers were still circulating, and the settlement negotiations had been grueling. She wore oversized sunglasses, even though it was overcast. She stopped when she saw him. She saw the stack of boxes by the door. She saw the key on the counter. "I didn't think you'd still be here," she said. Her voice was guarded, lacking the fight that had fueled her during the lawyers' meetings. "Just finishing up," Mark said. He didn't offer a smile. He didn't feel the need to. Elena walked into the room, her heels clicking on the bare floor. She looked around at the empty walls, the ghostly outlines where pictures had hung. She wrapped her arms around herself. "It feels small," she whispered. "It's just empty," Mark corrected her. "You can fill it with whatever you want now." He picked up his coat from the top of the last box. He put it on, buttoning it methodically. There was no anger left in him when he looked at her. There was just a dull, distant pity. She had the apartment. She had the view. She likely still had Julian in whatever fractured, paranoid capacity that relationship existed now. But she looked incredibly lonely. "Mark," she said as he lifted the box. She took a step toward him, then stopped. I hope you find what you're looking for." Mark paused at the elevator. He looked at her one last time, framing her in his mind not as his wife, but as a part of his past, like the city skyline behind her. "I'm not looking for anything, Elena," he said quietly. "I'm just glad I stopped waiting." The elevator doors opened. Mark stepped inside. He didn't press the button to hold the door. He pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the woman in the glass house, he didn't feel a sense of loss. He watched the numbers on the display count down. 30, 20, 10. When the doors opened at the ground floor, the rush of cold Chicago air hit him. It was freezing, biting, and sharp. It felt real. Mark walked out of the building, turned his collar up against the wind, and signaled for a cab. He didn't look up at the windows. He just looked forward.